What you're looking at right now is once a beautiful, ordinary girl with no criminal past or anything like that, and with no future at all. This condition is described as a historic disease known as radium jaw. Dozens of women were led to it by their desire to help their country during the First World War and earn a little money along the way. These ladies are best known as the Radium Girls. Today's story is about them. So sit back, darlings, because this one is terrifying. So when the start of the First World War was announced, thousands of American working-class women went to work in workshops where they were tasked with painting watch dials and other instrument faces for the military. At the time, they used a paint that was brand new, one that could glow in the dark. Pretty neat, right? Thanks to this, soldiers could see the markings on their watches. And not only on watches, and on other devices, too. The largest factory was located in the city of Orange, New Jersey, and it belonged to the Radium Corporation of the United States. That's where, roughly between 1917 and 1926, about 4,000 workers were hired, mostly young girls, some of whom were only 15 years old. Why hire girls specifically? Well, men were far more likely to be drafted to the front, and girls also had perfectly small and neat hands, ideal for artistic work. The job, as they say, was no joke, and most of the girls were so satisfied that they happily spread the word about the work to their friends. It was actually quite common for entire groups of sisters and friends to work side by side in the same studio. And of course, it wasn't just patriotism driving the girls to those factories. The pay was genuinely good. On average, 3 times more than any other factory job. Add to that the fact that at the time, women everywhere earned less overall. So those lucky enough to get a position were in the top 5% of female earners. Dial painting was elite work for poor working class girls. And on top of all that, there was one more perk, or what the girls considered a perk at the time. The workers were called ghost girls because by the end of their shift, each of them literally glowed in the dark. And many of these girls made full use of it. They'd wear their best dress to the shift so that after work, when they went out to relax or maybe to a dance, they'd literally shine there. Even more so, the girls would paint the glowing paint right onto their lips, teeth, and hair. One of those girls was 18-year-old Grace Fryer, who in 1917 got a job at one of the Radium Corporation factories in Orange. During working hours, she and her colleagues faithfully followed the painting technique. They worked with standard brushes while the size of the dials varied. Some of them were only 3.5 cm wide. The method was dead simple. Lip, dip, paint. That meant that before drawing a line or a dot, you had to use your lips or tongue to give the brush the right shape. Thin and pointed. And every time the workers did this, they were actually swallowing a little bit of that green paint. The first thing we asked was whether it was harmful. Of course not. Never put anything in your mouth that would hurt you. Mr. Savoy, the manager, said it was safe and that we had nothing to fear, one worker later recalled. Maybelle Burliff, who had trained young Grace Fryer in this technique. There was just one tiny little catch. And no, not tiny at all. It was a massive, hairy catch. It was all a lie. In reality, this was extremely dangerous. We'll continue right after I thank everyone who supports the channel by subscribing on YouTube or on Buy Me a Coffee. It means the world because this channel exists thanks to you, and I love making exclusive episodes for you, darlings. I truly love it. And secondly, if you're hanging out on TikTok, please use my sound. Sit back, darlings, because this is terrifying. For any videos, sit back, darlings, because this is terrifying. It would make me happy too, and I'll go right ahead and like your videos, leave comments and all of that. You can find it in my account. The link is in the description. All right, back to the video. So the glowing green paint was none other than radium, an extremely toxic element discovered about 20 years before these events. People were already dying from radium poisoning before the first dial painter ever picked up a brush. Even Madame Curie, who discovered the element, received radiation burns from working with it. And her husband suggested that if he had to work with a kilogram of radium, he would most likely suffer full body burns and go blind. That's precisely why the men who worked with radium at the factories did everything to avoid direct contact with it. They wore lead aprons and only touched radium using special tongs and only in gloves. But then, why did the female artists who were literally putting radium in their mouths have no protection whatsoever? Here's the thing. In the early 20th century, small amounts of radium were believed to be beneficial for health. Various scientists put forward numerous theories about the healing properties of radium. These so-called discoveries were also backed by the corporations that mined the element, because it was enormously profitable for them. The business built on false research was booming. Radium was being added to practically everything at that time: cosmetics, toothpastes, hair care products, and even butter and milk. Could I get some butter with radium, please? Water was also enriched with radium. Among the well-known brands, even Borchome was involved. God help us. And of course, it was added to medicines too. The most famous was the miracle cure Radithor, which The Unseen Witness already made a video about a few months ago. Go check it out, it's genuinely fascinating. It claimed to cure hypertension, diabetes, impotence, and they even noticed its amazing property of killing cancer cells. Except it turned out that besides cancer cells, it killed pretty much all cells in the body. James Turp, curator of the National Museum of Nuclear Science and History in the US, says that radium became the ultimate trend of the time. It was marketed as a cure for literally any condition and illness you could possibly imagine. Companies would slap the word "radi" onto their products as nothing but a marketing tool, even when radium wasn't actually being used. Newspapers claimed that radium would add years to your life. But in practice, things turned out a little differently. The health problems among the factory workers didn't appear immediately, only after about 5 years. In 1922, Amelia Molly Maggia, one of Grace's colleagues, was forced to leave work due to illness. At the time, the woman still didn't know what was wrong with her. And nobody did. Not her colleagues, not management, she just fell a little ill. And of course, this isn't the kind of story where you wake up one day and everything falls apart overnight. No, these changes all happened very, very gradually. First, things get a little worse. Then you get used to it, and it starts to feel like the new normal, and that's just how you live. Until one moment when you realize it's all gone off the rails. For Amelia, it all started with a toothache. The dentist pulled one tooth, and when the neighboring tooth started hurting, he simply pulled that one too. In place of the extracted teeth, ulcers formed that constantly bled and festered. Soon the woman felt an aching pain in her limbs, and this pain was so intense that she literally stopped being able to walk. The doctor then suggested it was rheumatism and sent her home with aspirin. The woman had her doubts, but he said something along the lines of, "Who's the doctor here, me or you?" And that settled it, of course. By May 1922, Amelia was in despair. By that point, she had lost most of her teeth, and the mysterious infection kept spreading through her body. Her entire lower jaw, the roof of her mouth, and even the cartilage of her ears were one massive inflammation. But even that wasn't the worst of it. At yet another dentist visit, he simply touched her jaw and his fingers broke the bone. The jawbone. Can you imagine? Well, and again, I'll remind you of the Unseen Witnesses video about the guy whose jaw literally fell off. Link right here. I say jaw, and the video from the Unseen Witness doesn't get any less wild because of it. Anyway, the doctor removed the jaw. Not during surgery, he simply inserted his fingers into her mouth and pulled out the upper part of the jawbone. Just a few days later, the girl had her lower jaw removed in the same way. Amelia was literally falling apart before everyone's eyes. And sadly, she wasn't alone in this. By that time, Grace Fryer had also started having... Fryer had problems with her teeth, pain in her legs, and all sorts of other things. And the other girls were also slowly beginning to show all these symptoms too. On September 12, 1922, the strange infection that had been tormenting Amelia for about a year spread to the tissues of her throat. At 5 p.m. that day, her mouth was filled with blood. The bleeding was so severe that the nurse was unable to stop it, and the woman died. She was only 24 years old. The doctors were baffled by the case. They simply couldn't understand what had happened, what this strange infection was, and how it had consumed this girl so completely. In the death certificate, the cause of death was listed as syphilis. One by one, the former colleagues of the deceased followed her to the grave. By 1924, 50 women who had worked at the factory had fallen ill, and a dozen of them had died. Yet the Radium Corporation of the USA spent nearly 2 years denying any responsibility. But the war had ended, rumors were spreading, and eventually business slumped. To try to fix the situation, the company hired independent experts to investigate whether there was really any connection between the dials and this infection. The research confirmed the link. But such results didn't sit well with the businessmen. The company president was outraged and, instead of accepting the findings, paid for new studies that published new results. Something like, according to these studies, radium paint harmed no one. The president of the company also lied to the Department of Labor, which had launched an investigation into the verdict of the initial report. And he also publicly condemned the women for trying to pin their own illnesses on the firm and condemned their attempts to seek financial assistance or have their ever-growing hospital bills covered. In short, the Radium Corporation did everything in its power to paint its former workers in a negative light. At their direction, doctors linked the deaths of the girls primarily to syphilis, a sexually transmitted infection that in those years became a convenient tool to destroy the reputations of those unfortunate women in the eyes of the general public. Radium was still considered safe, even beneficial. The workers continued to fight and push back not only against the president and his company, but also against public opinion broadly. Fortunately, in 1925, a doctor named Harrison Martland, who had previously studied the effects of radioactive materials on the human body, developed a test that once and for all proved that radium was poisonous and that it was the radium-based paint that had poisoned the women. He also explained exactly what was happening inside the bodies of the victims. The radium they had swallowed while shaping the brushes with their lips eventually settled in all of their organs, after which it constantly irradiated the body from the inside. For example, Grace Fryer's spine had by that point already been shattered. She was forced to wear a steel back brace. Another girl's jaw had been destroyed and resembled rotting wood. And there was no way to stop radium from destroying their bodies. Women who had not long ago been delighted by their nickname of ghost girls now dreaded looking at their own reflections in the mirror. They still glowed in the dark, and that now meant only one thing: a death sentence for each of them. Despite attempts by the Radium Corporation to somehow discredit Martland's work, they got nowhere. To back up his position, the doctor additionally hired medical experts to re-examine the body of the late Amelia. And lo and behold, no signs of syphilis were found on it, but there were plenty of signs of radiation. Specialists also examined the bodies of other deceased workers at the corporation. The signs of radioactive exposure were identical. After this, the surviving radium girls began to unite even more and fight against the system. And they fought not only for themselves, because even after all the deaths that had occurred, women in factories across the country continued to paint dials with the same paint using the same technique. Grace Fryer led the fight. For 2 years, she searched for a lawyer who could take on the case. But lawyers refused her one by one for various reasons. Some simply didn't believe what the women were saying, and some were afraid to fight against giants like the Radium Corporation of the USA. The situation was further complicated by the fact that the women weren't protected by the law. In those years, radium poisoning was not classified as a workplace disease eligible for compensation. Furthermore, for the women who dared to file a lawsuit, the statute of limitations had expired, Victims of occupational poisoning at the time had to file their lawsuits within 2 years, but I'll remind you, they simply couldn't do that since the first symptoms didn't start, appearing until 5 years after they had actually begun working. It seemed like an impossible closed loop that couldn't be broken. However, Grace was the daughter of a trade union delegate, and she was filled with determination to hold the guilty company accountable. Finally, in 1927, a young lawyer named Raymond Barry took on the case. At that point, Grace and her colleagues found themselves at the center of a globally recognized courtroom drama. A total of 5 factory workers, including Fryer, had the courage to file the lawsuit. They were Edna Hussman, Catherine Schaub, Quinta MacDonald, and Albina Larice. During the first hearing before the court in January 1928, 2 of them were bedridden, and not one of them could even raise her hand to take the oath. To win the case, Raymond Barry hired a radiophysicist named Catherine Rooney, who measured the radioactivity in the breath of the 5 women who had painted the dials. She testified that all of them had swallowed so much radium that their very breath was toxic. Yet even with such evidence, the trial moved very slowly. The defending company was deliberately dragging out the proceedings. Eventually, Grace and her friends settled with the Radium Corporation out of court. The terms stipulated that each of the Radium girls would receive a one-time payment of $10,000 plus $600 per year for the rest of their lives. All incurred medical and legal expenses were also covered by the company. Even though the case didn't end with a conviction by the jury, it made enormous waves. The front pages of American newspapers were racing each other to publish material about the case. So it was no surprise that a wave of concern and outrage also reached the state of Illinois, where in the city of Ottawa, a radium company was operating in which workers continued to paint watch dials with the life-threatening paint. Among those who read the news was Catherine Wolfe, one of the workers at that company. People there had started falling ill as early as 1927 and were asking for compensation for their hospital bills. But everyone was being refused by management. And when the girls raised the issue of the threat to their lives, because look, just read the newspapers, it's right there in print, the company started denying everything. On top of that, it placed an ad in the local newspaper. If we ever had reason to believe that any working conditions posed a risk to the health of our employees, we would immediately suspend operations. But the lying statement didn't make the problem disappear. The workers endured until the mid-1930s, after which they filed a complaint with the Illinois Industrial Commission. In this state, the fight for justice was led by Catherine Wolfe. But everything was further complicated by historical circumstances. The community literally shunned her and her friends for the fact that she had filed a lawsuit against a company that was one of the few still operating and providing jobs during those years. In the 1930s, the USA was in the grip of the Great Depression. By the time Catherine and 4 other women found a worthy lawyer, the company had dissolved and moved to New York. Even though doctors recommended that Catherine drop the case because her health was not in great shape, to put it mildly, she refused to stop. In 1938, the woman developed a tumor the size of a grapefruit, and she also lost her teeth. Her days were running out, but she still decided to testify in court. In the spring of 1938, the Illinois Industrial Commission ruled in favor of the women. The lawyer representing the radium firm's interests filed an appeal in hopes of overturning the verdict. But the court once again sided with the plaintiffs. In total, the women won in courts of various levels 8 times before finally receiving their money. Sadly, Catherine Wolfe, the initiator of that process, did not live to see justice served, and the sad truth is that even the delayed money from the company couldn't heal anyone. The women kept dying. And those who hadn't died yet suffered from massive bone cancer, anemia, cataracts. Yet the court cases were of enormous importance, since they prompted a review of the permissibility of radium use by ordinary people. By 1935, the use of radium in most consumer goods had ceased, and the government banned its use. Furthermore, the authorities amended labor legislation on occupational diseases. As for radium in the paint used for painting dials, right up to the 1970s, it was still used. But by then, the women working with it were instructed on proper safety measures and given protective equipment. So, avoiding contact with the paint became standard practice. The last radium girl, May Keene, died at the age of 107. It happened in March 2014. How did she manage to live so long? The woman herself explained it by her love of laziness and her refusal to do anything she didn't enjoy. Today, all the radium girls are gone, but since radium has a half-life of 1,600 years, it is still preserved in their bones. So the ghost girls will go on glowing in their graves for a long time to come. Darlings, if you've watched this video all the way to this very second, you know what? You're the best. You know it yourself, I tell you this all the time. And I truly mean it. Thank you for still being here, for still being with me. Leave a like, write a comment. I want to see you. I want to hear from you. And I'll remind you that by becoming a sponsor for as little as 10 Aravinias a month, you'll be giving great support to this channel. And you'll also get access to additional content, literally bonus episodes you won't find anywhere else. All links to support the channel are in the description. This was Sonia. See you in the next video. In the meantime, check out this one or this one, because they're great too. All right, that's it. I'm off.